Hey, remember Jessica Lucas from BDS earlier today? She said that you can now stand on stage and say that you smoke weed, right? I'm not going to do that. Anyone out here ever buy a bag of weed? Come on, you're in the audience, you're not. Yeah, okay. So the question is, how did you know that it was trustworthy? How did you know that it was efficacious, effective? How did you know that you were going to get a buzz? You didn't, right? You didn't. And you know, even if you liked it and you went back to the guy the next week, you weren't going to get the same bag of weed. You weren't going to get the same stuff. It was all just a crapshoot, right? So in today's hemp CBD world, there's a little bit of that same calculation going on. We've got hemp that's being grown from coast to coast, and you know, a lot of people, everybody is kind of new at it, you know, from the farmers, you know, it goes all the way back to seed genetics, to the farmers, you know, to the extractors, to the, you know, distillers, concentrate, you know, all this stuff. How can we know if it's the good stuff? So we've got a really interesting next half hour here. We're going to have two speakers that deign to help us out to help determine if the hemp CBD that is for sale is the good stuff. So we just had an interesting conversation about USDA. You can get a USDA seal on your product. Hey, now that's some level of an indication of quality. You've got a regenerative agriculture. That could be something. So next up we have Merril Gilbert from TraceTrust, and a lovely little tagline, you like to make edibles credible. Everyone loves a little alliteration from a cautious cowboy, and so Merril's got interesting things here. You've been around for a long time, and so Merril, go, right? Teach us.
Wait, how does this work?
I think press the green button there.
Perfect. All right, hi, I am Merril. I am the co-founder and CEO of TraceTrust, and we are introducing a true dose, which is the first universal third-party certification program for dose accuracy in cannabis and hemp-derived products. I come from years of experience, and so does my business partner, in the food and beverage industry and manufacturing and product development. And about 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, we started down this path as we started to see legal cannabis becoming more and more into the place and more acceptable, and realized that the biggest gap there was unpredictability. Unpredictability in the supply chain, but more importantly, unpredictability in the effects that you would feel or could consume. And that really the gap that we could provide is leading in universal education around safe and reliable use. And what was that going to look like? So these little photos show you a couple of those wonderful things that we see by the side of the road that we're not really sure. Where is this from? How is it made? What's going to happen to me if I take this? So, as I said, the most important factor if this expanding, wonderful industry is going to happen has to be around safety. And for the consumer, it's all about trust. And having, particularly in anything that you're ingesting, an unpleasant experience, and I guarantee you, whether you have your own story, you know somebody else's story when they've had too much or too little or no effect whatsoever. And if you're going to include something like this into your health and wellness lifestyle, you want something that is going to do just that, either make me relax, help me go to sleep, help me perform better. And so we have come together and really starting to talk universally together in this room about how do we do that? How do we identify these products? How do we go beyond? And right now, today, that is extremely important as the news is filled with these very unfortunate experiences around unregulated cannabis, vaping products, e-cigarettes, and what is actually going into these. We know that in the legal cannabis and hemp and CBD world, those products are highly looked at for residues, for molds, for other extractions. So there is nothing right now linking to anything that was bought in a license legal entity. And so this is important as things are evolving and investigations are happening. So the first things that we need to look at is terminology. And that has been spoken about several times today, and I really appreciate all of my colleagues here going through it. It's a little loose, and we have a little, we're getting there, we're getting better, but if it's confusing for those of us that are the experts, it's even more confusing for the retailer and the consumer. So let's just start. This is the hemp plant. This is actually a male plant. The female plant has those really beautiful, luscious flowers. They're very dense leaves, and then they have those trichome hairs, and that's where that really concentrated oil and desirable oil is coming from. The male and the female are needed to make seeds, so that's where the seeds come from. But the entire plant is very valuable, and every part of it is usable. So yes, the flowers and the leaves of the female give you that rich oil. It's what we're using for consumption. But the stalks, the stems, the roots, the entire thing has got some. But that also leads to another confusing, what is biomass? So for some processors, biomass is the entire plant. For other, it's what's left over after you've taken out those beautiful female buds and flowers and what's left over. So we talk about that. The other thing is with the hemp plant, the extraction methodology. So we'll talk a little bit about how it's done with agitation, it's done with water, it's also done with solvents. But one of the other new common or much more prevalent things that you're seeing a lot, particularly in the beverage, is juicing. And juicing is really good for two reasons. One, the male plants that are taken out of the field to stay away from the female, so no seeds are being made, those have a little less oil and they're great for juicing. The other thing about it too is cold processing removes all the THC because there's no heat activation. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind about this. Hemp oil, which is what we extract for, is about 30 to 40% all of the plant compounds. And so that is what we're pulling from those extraction methodologies, and we're looking to get to a cleaner product. But this is where, because you still have so much of that plant compound, that's why you get that very sticky, residual, smelly, goopy oil, which is desirable because you've got to start. And the most full spectrum, which we'll get into again. So distillate, another term that we hear a lot about, is the materials that are separated out of that crude oil at different boiling points. And so again, the beauty of where we are right now and the fast pace of technology that is intersecting here is that extraction methodologies are going in so many different directions, and we're so much more sophisticated that we are getting different ways of really getting to understand how to get to desirable compounds from manipulating the boiling points. So after distillation, you now have 1 to 5% extraneous materials left. Isolate is what you're continually getting as you continue to distillate to the point of where all you have left is the CBD, and now you have crystals. So think of it this way. Lycopene as a supplement is an isolate. Full spectrum is everything else. It's the opposite. It's the complete opposite of the plant compounds, and it is all of that good stuff. However, when we talk about broad spectrum, we are now talking about what we want of those desired compounds. We are learning more and more each day that the plant pieces of this can be pulled out and used for different, and that's where more benefits are coming from. So think of it this way, that eating a tomato is full spectrum. It's all the good thing. It's everything loaded plus the lycopene. Terpenes is what gives the plant its flavor, its odor, its smell, and it is also the characteristics that are often found in essential oils and other fragrant plants. It helps the plant grow, it protects it from disease and insects, And studies are now being done to identify how terpenes with the CBD or the THC come together and create that entourage effect, to create those different feelings, those different things. Is it helping me relax? Is it helping me sleep? Is it relieving my pain? These are all the questions that are happening. And I love sharing this particular slide with you. It is created by the Herb Song, and Jamie Evans is just a really talented young woman. She comes from the wine industry, but she has really become one of the leading people that really can explain this experience between how the things interact with each other. And I can make this slide available for you, or just go to the Herb Song and you'll learn so much more. So now that we've touched on the terminology, the next thing, which is the most prevalent and prominent thing that we have to talk about today, is the supply chain. Where are these plants coming from? Hemp, as we've talked about today, is recognized as a fiber crop. It is grown for centuries all over the world. But there's a very big difference between industrialized hemp and hemp that is grown and cultivated for consumption. And so even though that CBD might be a minor ingredient in your product, it is crucial, particularly today, to really understand all the ingredients in there and where did they come from. As John just so clearly articulated up here, this plant absorbs everything from that soil. So you want to understand where that plant came from, and you want to know where that oil was processed. This is really the future, and I can't stress it enough, how to really look at that. And you're already, because most of you are in this industry, have these standards already and know how to do it, so I encourage you with the supply chain, which then leads to foreign ingredient verification, right? It's really desirable to buy a lower cost product these days that comes from another country. However, medicinal hemp, the hemp that we're talking about, the USA organic hemp, what's being grown in Canada, these are cultivated specifically for medicinal and consumption use. And with that in mind, these farmers are really actively using good agricultural practices. And so we look to this new supply chain for that. Label, I'm not going to get into what's a good label and what's a bad label. What I want to talk about is misleading label claims, right? So we have to, again, put the same filter on that we use for judging any other products we're either bringing into our retail shop or to those that we want to consume ourselves. Over-promising claims create confusion, not just for the consumer, but for the retailer. What is it? How is it supposed to act? When does it start? When does it end? How am I supposed to feel? You got to know, right? So just watch what it says and look for better qualifications around what the label contents are. Experience matters. I'm so honored to be standing here to discuss this with my cohorts in the food and beverage industry. We, in the supplements and nutraceuticals, we are leading the way. We come from making great products. We come from reliable supply chains, and we come from understanding how this comes about. And I really look to these two brands as a good example of that. Weller and John from Ree Botanicals, who was just up here, starts with good leadership. These are companies that were already founded in good making of products. They've made snacks, they've made beverages, they've made supplements. They understand where things come from and how things are to be done correctly. In the case of Weller, it's really great because they're full transparency and they're very much open about all of their lab results. And this, again, in these products, you need a way of pointing to what works and what doesn't and where things are coming from. But more importantly for the consumer, they want to understand and know this. And with John, he just talked about this. Regenerative agriculture and organic U.S. hemp really moving us to growing and understanding where these, how things are grown and done with a commitment to health and wellness. And then the fact that they're in small batches. With today, we're not ready for mass producing. We're doing it and we're getting there and we're getting better, and thank God we have the type of reliable co-packers coming on board each and every day. but it's that commitment to that small batch and 100% traceability that is really something to look for. Third-party certifications, this is the world that we live in, but it is independent third-party certifications for what we rely on to tell us, is somebody really a good actor? Are they really following standards? Can they repeat those standards? Are they training their employees? Are they making sure that everything within their facilities is done right, and that commitment? And so we, just using this as an example, created a true dose, and actually HGMP specific to the hemp industry really aligns up with also this very new certification of the U.S. Hemp Authority. We really believe that the consumer and the retailers need a way to identify how things are done. And it's really done by the things that we're talking about here today. Transparency of ingredients, label claims, instructions for use, dose accuracy, good manufacturing practices. As a whole, we look at this very much into how we buy things today. Every single thing on here talks to you about corporate responsibility, responsible sourcing, ingredient integrity, and good manufacturing practices all along that supply chain. So what I'd love to do now is that I'd love to open this up to some questions and allow us to really kind of dive into what's on your mind and what are you concerned about today and for the future of hemp and CBD.
Okay, there are a million certifications on here. If I'm a new brand and I want to focus on 1 or 3, which is the one that I should focus on first? Because looking at all of these, NSF is 5-10 grand per SKU, and new businesses may not have that kind of money. So which one do I focus on first?
So good, excellent question. So the question is, which should I focus on first? Number one is, are you producing this yourself, or are you producing in your own facility, or are you producing it outside of that?
I contract a farm that works with a white labeler.
So that's where you start first. What do they have in place? What are some of the things that they're working with so that you can align with them? And normally in those kinds of situations, you should be able to carry that through so that when you're putting on your paperwork and you're filing for whatever those certificates, you can validate it through and show that that's where your source materials are, which is one of those relationships in a co-packing world that you really want to be able to have. You want to be able to use their expertise, but you also need to be able to make sure that it aligns with your vision, your company, and your standards and your specifications.
Thank you.
Hi there. At the International Cannabinoid Research Conference this past year, Ethan Russo and his group in Prague was investigating the various sort of compounds that might be undesirable that they were finding in European CBD products available for consumers, and found that a lot of these products contained polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And that's because the hemp is, a lot of the farmers there will just dry it out over an open flame. With your validation, are you looking at PAHs, benzoate, that type of thing?
Not at this point in time, because we're really, so let me just explain. We don't do the lab testing. We're not a lab, okay? So we wrote a standard, and then the independent labs that we contract with run that standard. And so part of that is what will evolve over time, is how do we find out what are the things that we need to focus on? And that's why it's not so much about our mark versus somebody else's, but leading that conversation, that ecosystem between the lab partners and developing the ISO of standardization so that we can all not only acquire samples under the same guidelines, but what we're testing for. Because a lot of times, particularly with these new products, they're not coming from either a pharmaceutical or a nutraceutical or a food and beverage. They've just added on this new process, and they don't have the experience and what to look for in the total life cycle of the product.
Great information. I had a global question. As we conform our standards and raise the bar on what the consumer should look at, how can we in the U.S. begin to influence Colombia, the European states, the places that are starting to jump on the sourcing of hemp CBD as well?
That's another fabulous question. It starts here. It starts in rooms like this. We as an industry come together. We set those standards, and we come from our experience in manufacturing. And so as we say, these, again, we just talked about terminology, be very loose. We have to align on what the meanings of those things are and adapt them. We have to align on what constitute good agricultural practices and soil examination and looking deeper into that and set that. And so these become the industry norm, and then we bring in the other groups in which to align around that.
Do you think that consumers are going to realize the difference between GMP, Hemp Authority, all of the things that we're trying to bring as best practices? There's a lot to force feed the consumer as we come out of this craze. What do you see our position in 2 to 3 years?
So for this industry really to expand at the rapid pace that it's expected to, the crucial part of this is that the consumer that's willing to pay more is already looking for these things. They're already, if they're going to incorporate this into a lifestyle, into a health and wellness, into a relaxation instead of a drink in a social environment, they're already that mindset there. It is actually the others, the bad actors, that we need to start to figure out how to move past that. And again, it's got to go beyond that price factor, but we're not there yet. So it is starting first with those of us that are leading and making good, safe, reliable products, and continually talking about that and getting the word out and educating with unified conversation and terminology. But more importantly, it's the next step behind that, to call out the gas station product, to call out what's coming, from outside the United States that we cannot trace all of the elements of where it came from. And we have to really, again, come together around education and safe use and make sure that we are saying the same things day in and day out. And I think that's particularly when we see so much, not only in just label claims, but these very horrific scenarios that we're right now seeing with the e-cigarettes and the unregulated cannabis vaping products. We have to figure out how to mitigate that before the FDA. We have to be ahead of that regulatory body. Thank you.
Thanks, Merril. That's all we have time for.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks very much.